The definition of Flexbox, according to MDN, is as follows. Flexbox is a one-dimensional layout model and a method that could offer space distribution between items in an interface and has powerful alignment capabilities. Well, that's a mouthful, but what does it mean exactly? Let's break up these words into little segments and start with one-dimensional. In Flexbox, items can be spread into columns or rows. One-dimensional. There are also grids, which aren't one-dimensional, but that's for later. There are some very important terms to keep in mind when learning Flexbox. One is the Flex container. This is the parent element that holds all the Flex items, and it's usually a div. By default, Flex containers have a direction of row, so the main axis goes from left to right, while the cross axis goes from top to bottom. Justify content spreads items across the main axis, while align items spreads them across the cross axis. The opposite happens when you set the direction to column. The main axis goes from top to bottom, and the cross axis goes from left to right. We'll look at examples of all these being used in Webflow in a second. Okay, so I'm going to start by bringing in a div block. I already have one here, and I'm going to give it a class of Flex container. I will set the background to this yellow, and I'm going to give it a width of 1,000 pixels, and a height of 500 pixels. Okay, there we go. I'm going to drag in another div block into this one. I'm going to call this one Flex Item. And bear with me here. I know this seems kind of pointless right now, but I will be explaining all these in this just a second. So I'm going to grab this one. I spelled that wrong. Just realized I'm going to rename that Flex Item, not TM. I'm going to copy and paste this a couple times. Okay, there we go. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a combo class. So a combo class is when, I have this Flex Item class, right? I want to give this a different background color and make this just a little bit smaller, but I also want it to maintain the other properties, right? So how would I do that? By using a combo class. So if I give this a class of 2, because this is the second Flex Item, right? And then if I decide to give it this, instead of a height of 200 pixels, I give it a height of 300 pixels, right? It changes in width. One second. I will make the background color a little bit lighter just to really show that. There we go. So it maintains the original styles, but I can also change some of them and make them how I want. I'll do the same thing to the last one, except I'll make this one a little bit darker instead of lighter. There we go. And I'll make this smaller. Okay. Now, we begin by going to the Flex container and hitting this button right here. Next to the layout panel and the display panel, we hit display flex, like this. Now, obviously something does happen, right? And we notice a difference because before, all these items were overflown, right? We have a div, this Flex container, and we want all these elements to stay inside of them, right? That's what display flex helps us do. So it brings them inside the container. Okay, so by default, the direction is horizontal, so it goes from left to right, right? Now, another of our default settings is the align one. So this is the spread. This by default it is set to spread, right? So if I get rid of the default heights that I have set, if I just make this, for example, like auto, right? It's going to spread to the entirety of the Flex container, right? So it's going to go from up to down all the way. But if I put it back to the original thing, then it's how we had set it. Now let's go back and let's see. So the justify. Now we know that it's set all the way to the left. That's pretty much by default set to start. Or instead of using technical terms, we can just say left for now. Okay. Now let's test out a couple different align options. Okay. So let's try align start. Now, obviously, this doesn't make a difference because, as I explored before, stretch only works when you have the height set to auto, but start works like this, right? So it just aligns it to the top, again, using the cross axis. So it's the top of the cross axis. Now, if I align to the center, it goes to the middle of the Flex container, or the middle of the cross axis, and then align end, or align at the bottom, puts it at the bottom. Pretty self-explanatory. Now we get to justify, right? So justify, again, goes across the main axis when we're in direction horizontal, right? So right now we're at the left, but now I can center it, and I can go all the way to the right too. There's also space between and space around. So space between places in equal amounts of space between all the items, so that the same amount of space is here as it is here. The space around is something really nice. Each item has its own amount of space around the outside. So when put together, they all look like there's more space in between them, but really it's just the same space being doubled. Now let's hit direction vertical just so we can look at it this way. Okay, here we go. So if we reset this, there we go. Okay, so by default, again, it's set to align spread. Now if I get rid of the default width and I just leave this on auto, right, you can see it spreads across the entire container, but I will put that back. Where were we? Okay, so align start, again, similar thing. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Center and or right, however you want to refer to it. Okay, justify, again, pretty much the same thing. Now right now the problem arises is that our flex items, right, if we add them up, so this one's 200 pixels, this one's 300 pixels, so together they're 500 pixels, and then this one is 100 pixels, so 500 plus 100, that's 600 pixels, right? But our flex container is only 500 pixels, so let's make it a little bit bigger for demonstration purposes. There we go. Okay, now you can really see that, let me go back, there we go. Now you can really see that these are centered. They just didn't look so because of the actual height, and we'll get to wrapping in a second, but just, yep, so they are justified. Sorry, aligned. What am I saying? Okay, yep. So now this is ideal. We usually want elements to stay in the middle of their parent container. Now, talking about wrapping, right? So let's go back to direction horizontal and let's look at this. So I'm gonna give this space between, space around, sorry, and okay. So wrapping occurs. So let me just duplicate all these items real quick, just to really show you guys. I'm going to just make a bunch of them so you can see what's happening. Okay. Some of you might have noticed this. So here, this one is 200 pixels, right? But if we go back a couple, see how it's gradually getting smaller? And you might be wondering, like, why is that happening? It has to have a set width, right? 200 pixels. Well, what Flexbox does is that when we go back to the Flex container, if this here isn't set to wrap, what it does is it tries to fit all the items into, like, it's row in this case, right? But if we were going vertical like we were before, and we're trying to fit it vertically. So that's why it's called a one-dimensional tool. It's not really meant for it to go on to the next page. It's more for just like, okay, so like one row or one column, right? But in this case, we don't want that, right? We want them to actually take up 200 pixels or whatever their width is, right? So we're gonna hit wrap, and there we go. Now they take up the space that they were supposed to take up, and they all have their own amounts of space. Okay, well, that's it for Flexbox basics and Webflow. There's so much more we could have gotten into, like properties for the Flex items themselves, but I'll leave that for another time. Thank you for sticking around to the end. Make sure to subscribe and follow me on Instagram, link in the description. I'll see you guys next time.